haven't forgotten a recording in quite a while, so hopefully we'll keep the record up. We are in the fourth and fifth chapter of Revelation, and I'm going to try and get through both of them this week. We started with the fourth, we got a little way into the fifth, but I'm going to try and sum them up this week, and we'll get on to the sixth chapter. I included this week a couple of extra recordings from another man that I follow closely, and this he is a Anthony is a big fan of his too, and I mentioned before Michael Heiser. He's the one that really lit me up for the Old Testament. He passed away last year. Pancreatic cancer got him. Just he was in his 60s.
Wow.
A brutal loss for us, but he does have a wife and several folks that are carrying on his mission. So um, he's absent with us in body, but he's present with us in spirit. I included some of his lectures on Revelation also, because if there's one thing I have to say about Tom, he does tend to get a little narrow in his focus, and I want to open our focus out a little bit more. So if you've got some extra time, I've included some of Mike's lectures on Revelation, and I'm going to continue to add them as we go through. If you want to have a watch, he also has a transcript. So if you need to print uh, if you need to print it out and make some notes on it, feel free to do that. Same with Tom. Tom has his transcripts there of his lectures also, and I do have I've got paper everywhere here. So feel free to do that, but have a listen to Heiser's ideas on Revelation also, because I the one of the things that's been getting on my nerves about myself is that I was tending to get too focused on on just some things that I had an interest in, and I found myself being sucked into it, and um, and I pulled out Mike's book, the Unseen Realm, and opened it up again, and I remembered that I've gotten too focused in my sight here, and I want to open it up because as I read and listened to Heiser's lectures this past week in preparation for this week, I had forgotten how narrow I had gotten, and I'm afraid I've restricted our vision a little much. So I want to. That's why I want to back up a little bit and open the vision up a little bit, because I think I've lost touch with some of the things that the Father wants us to look at. So I'm going to look back at chapter 4 and 5, and I want to refocus that. I want to refocus and make sure that we understand what's going on in these first few chapters of Revelation. Um, in chapter 4, we looked at, and we looked at, as John is sitting there in chapter 4, it says, after this I, John, looked and beheld a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I had heard speaking at me like a trumpet said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. And at once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, and one seated on the throne. And John then goes to talk about the description of what he was looking at there. So, and I think I actually mentioned a couple of which I should have. That should have been the first thing that we looked at. Is when you look at John's description here, the first thing that should come into your mind is We've got a throne set on a high place, and we've got a host around. Not a not a massive host, but we've got uh, beings standing around this throne of God. And it should remind us of a courtroom setting because that's exactly what John was describing. And it's exactly what we are looking at in in um, in Daniel. And in fact, we're about to look at how closely this fourth and fifth chapter are to the description in Daniel 7 that we went through it. I hope everybody's mind was, you had those red flags going off, say, man, this sounds a lot like Daniel 7, because yeah, it does. It does. When John was looking at this, he had to have been thinking about Daniel 7, and we're going to see that that was in his mind as he was looking at and describing what he was seeing here. He was seeing something very similar, if not God taking basically what he showed Daniel and re-showing it to John. So we got to get in our head here that this is, and it's Heiser's terminology, the divine council, which is God and his close uh, nothing to call them but bodyguards, his close associates that are around him all the time, and we read about them in chapter 4 there. And John calls them the four living creatures. Daniel calls him the angels. So we have a very uh, vivid picture of a court in session, and that's what I want us to start thinking about it, because I had not fully realized what we're looking at here. I know a court, I know it's the divine council, but what we are actually looking at is a legal proceeding, a trial. In Hebrew, the word is rev. Uh, it's a legal proceeding, a prosecution, a, a presentation before a judge. That's exactly what we're looking at here, and I didn't put it all together until this week. So what I want to do, take us back to 1 Kings, and this is some of the things are that we are going to think about here, because this is not the first time outside of Daniel 7 that we have looked at a legal proceeding in the Old Testament, and there are bukus of them. There are just courts in session visions all through the Old Testament. And First Kings is not well, yeah, it is a vision, but First Kings is a hardcore example of what we're seeing here in Revelation. I'm in First Kings, and it's the 22nd chapter. And remember, Kings, First Chronicles, this is basically history lessons. So these are the history as the chroniclers wrote them down to record the history of Israel. So we are in the kingship of Ahab. And those of you that are familiar with the Old Testament, Ahab is not a good name. Ahab is one of the worst kings to rule over the nation. And at this point, God has about had it with him. So God calls the court in session to pass judgment on Ahab. And And judgment's going to be a term we're going to see again and again through Revelation. It's different from punishment. It's different from punishment. Punishment is a ruling, and you're gonna sit in the corner for 10 minutes. That's punishment. Judgment is what brought about that punishment. The judgment is you spoke to your mother in a disrespectful voice. That's the judgment. The punishment comes from the judgment. So, God is calling the court in session to speak judgment against Ahab. 44th, the 22nd chapter of First Kings, and I'm going to start in about the verse. I'm going to start in verse 18. So verse 18 of Kings, First Kings 22. And the
You
king of
said
it.
20.
I'm sorry.
20 or 22?
22.
Okay.
22. 2 2. I might have said 20, but I'm looking at 22 right there.
Okay.
Me and my eyes don't always see the same. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "Did you not tell me? Did you not tell? Did wait? Did I see? I tell you, I don't see the same thing. Did I not tell you that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil?" And uh, and Micah said, "Therefore, hear the word of the Lord." Micah is a prophet. "Hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right and on his left. And the Lord, Jehovah, the Lord said, Who will entice Ahab, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead?" God called the court in session. Seated on his throne, he had the host of heaven before him on his right and his left. And he asked the host of heaven, "Who will entice Ahab?" So that's the scene we're looking at. We're looking at God calling the divine council in session to pass judgment on Ahab. And he's calling for a volunteer. God is calling from a volunteer for the host. And one said one thing, and one said another. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, "I will entice him." And the Lord said to him, "By what means?" And he, the spirit, said, "I will go out, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." And he said, "You are to entice him, and you will succeed, and you will succeed. Go out and do so. Now therefore, behold, Jehovah the Lord was has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets. The Lord has decreed disaster for you." Then Zedekiah, son of Chimeniah, came near and struck Micah on the cheek and said, "How did the Spirit of the Lord go from me to speak to you?" And Micah said, "Behold, you shall see on that day when you go into the inner chamber to hide yourself." And the king of Israel said, "Seize Micah and take him, and go back to Ammon, the governor of the city, and to Joash the king's son, and say, Thus says the king, put this fellow in prison, and feed him meager rations of bread and water until I come in peace." And Micah said, "If you return in peace, the Lord will not has not spoken to me." And he said, "Hear," and Micah said, hear all you peoples." So there's a problem in the throne room um, of Jehoshaphat, who is the current king of Israel, um, that he's got two prophets one of which, this guy that we just read, Zedekiah, was the king's chosen prophet. And you heard him say, "Did I not tell you that he would not prophesy good concerning me to evil?" Jedediah is talking about Micah. He's the problem prophet, and he's bringing bad news. But um, uh, to Jehoshaphat, and they go ahead and we drop around down to, well, let's continue on at verse 29. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king of Judah went up to Ramoth Gilead. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "I will disguise myself and go into battle, but you wear your robes." And the king of Israel disguised himself and went into battle. And now the king of Syria had commanded the 32 captains of his chariots, "Fight with neither, fight with neither small nor great, but only with the king of Israel." So we have Judah and Israel, and we have them both fighting against Syria. Syria is telling his men, go straight for the king. In other words, they're trying to kill the king and win the battle. And when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, "It is surely the king of Israel." So they turned to fight against him. And Jehoshaphat cried out. And when the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. But a certain man drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the scale armor and the breastplate. Therefore he said to the driver of his chariot, "Turn around and carry me out of the battle, for I am wounded." And the battle continued that day, and the king was propped up on his chariot facing the Syrians. Until the evening he died, and the blood of the wound flowed unto the bottom of the chariot. And about sunset a cry went out through the army, "Every man to his city and every man to his country." It worked. They killed the king, and now the army is in disarray. So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. And they washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up the blood, and the prostitutes washed themselves in it, according to the word of the Lord that he had spoken. Now the rest of the acts of Ahab, and all he did, and the ivory house he had built, and all the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles and the book of the Kings of Israel? So Ahab slept with his father, and Uzziah his son reigned in his place. You notice how the chroniclers the chroniclers did not mention Ahab's name. He was just simply called the king of Judah. That's how bad a king he was. They did not call his name until they had to say that he had died. So the Lord called into session the host of heaven to pronounce judgment upon the king. And the judgment was an odd one. He called for a volunteer what to do about Ahab. And this volunteering spirit came up and said, "Let me go. I will confuse his prophets." And that's exactly what he did. The king didn't know what to do. The king uh, thought he was going to confuse the Syrians by hiding himself and sending this Jehoshaphat out to act like him. And Jehoshaphat, as soon as he saw them chasing after him, he let it be known that he was not the king, and the king was killed in battle due to the confusion that the spirit had caused. So this is a vivid example of God calling the council in session. and passing judgment on, in this case, the king. We see other examples. Isaiah 6 is another example of God calling his divine council in session. Ezekiel, the first 11 chapters of Ezekiel, we see the divine council over and over again. And then, of course, Daniel 7. Now, we want to flip over to Micah. And Micah is one of the minor prophets, so you got to head over there. Micah is right after Amos and Jonah and Joel. So if you see Joel, go to Amos and then Jonah, and then you're going to see Micah, and he is, that's Zechariah. Micah in the 6th chapter. This is God presenting a case. He's presenting a case against Judah here, a rev. The Hebrew word for a prosecution, a court case, is rev. So he's presenting a rev against Judah, and this is through his prophet. So we read in chapter 6 of Micah, hear what the Lord says. Arise and plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, you mountains, the indictment of the Lord, and you enduring foundations of the earth, for the Lord has an indictment against his people, and he will contend with Israel. O my people, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? Answer me. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery, and I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember what Balak the king of Moab devised when Balaam the son of Beor answered him, and what happened from Shittim to Gilgal, and what you may know, and that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. God is presenting a justification, a court case against his people, because he is about to judge them, and he wants to make sure that his case is clear to the people that he is judging. And it goes on. The Lord presents his case to the people to justify his punishment, his judgment, and then the subsequent punishment. So you see, you could be watching court TV, and you hear this kind of language. Hear the indictment of the Lord. The Lord has an indictment against his people, and then he goes on and justifies the indictment. What have I done to you? I have done nothing good, nothing but good for you, and you turn against me. So it's over and over again. You see it in Isaiah 6. You see it in Ezekiel 1 through 11. You see it everywhere. In Deuteronomy, and this is a critical one. In Deuteronomy, and we're going to see this in on Wednesday night in Genesis. In Deuteronomy, Moses brings a rev against not the people, but Moses brings a judgment, a case against the nations. Moses is standing in for God. So in Deuteronomy 32, we start. Let's just start in the first verse. Let's jump up to the verse before the 32nd chapter, the last verse of the 31st chapter. So we're in Deuteronomy 31, the last verse. Then Moses spoke the words of this song until they were finished in all the ears of the assembly of Israel. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop as rain, and my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass, and like the showers upon the herb. For I will proclaim the name of the Lord, and ascribe the greatness of our Lord. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are just. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, and just and upright is he. They have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children, because they have banished. They are a crooked and twisted generation. Do you thusly repay the Lord, you foolish and senseless people? Is not he your Father who created you, who made you and established you? Now you think it sounds like Moses is about to send judgment on Israel, because this is exactly the kind of words Micah was saying, but we think different. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will teach you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the numbers of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is his allotted heritage. He found him in a desert land and in the howling ways of the wilderness. He encircled him and cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye, like the eagle that stirs up his nest, that flutters over its wings, spreading out his wings and catching them, bearing them on his pinions. The Lord alone guided him. No foreign god was with him. He made him ride on the high places of the land, and ate the produce of the field. And he suckled with him the honey out of the rock, and the oil out of the flinty rock, curds from the herd, and milk from the flock, with the fat of lambs, the rams of Bashan, and goats, and with the very finest of the wheat. And you drank flowing wine made from the blood of the grape. And you think, well, wait a minute, I'm confused. What's going on here? Moses is about to present the case against the people of Israel, but he's reminding them, and this is, our God is a just God, a terrible just God, but he also has mercy. So Moses is presenting the case against, and remember, we're in the wilderness here, and you remember how great the people of Israel were at following God in the wilderness, right? About 2 or 3 days and they were turned back away. Moses is about to pronounce judgment on them, but he doesn't say he is. This is sort of a sneak up on them approach. He starts to pronounce this: they have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children because they are blemished. And we're thinking, Moses is about to pronounce a judgment on the nations, because that's what they're thinking. They are not his children. No, they're not. We are God's children. But he makes a right turn right there at verse 7. Remember the days of old. And now people are sitting up. Remember, Moses is speaking this to the people of Israel. Remember the days of old. Oh, they're sitting up. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, and your elders, and they will tell you. And the people are thinking, he's talking about the Egyptians now. How our fathers, remember, they're through the wilderness there. So they're thinking back on their fathers that were under Egypt. He's thinking, here it comes, here it comes. We're gonna get revenge. And then it said, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, and he divided mankind, and he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. Oh no. Oh no. God, right here in 7, 8, and 9, that's the description, and some of you might have already figured it out. That's the description of the Tower of Babel. That's the description of the Tower of Babel and what God did to the nations under him at Babel. When they rebelled against God's leadership, they did not do what God said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and the first thing they did is go and make them a city, coalesced, and started thinking about, we can do better than God. And it was Babel that God divorced the nations. It says it right there. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, just like the prodigal son. God is pronouncing judgment, a potential judgment on his people, by using the example, I can divorce you guys just as I divorce the nations. And this is a brutal threat here. So once again, we've got God speaking through Moses as a judge and presenting the case against his nation by using basically case law. If you know the court goes back in history to look at the decisions that the court has passed down, and they call that case law. So he's looking back on his judgments and saying, this case is looking a lot like the one before me now. And Moses goes ahead in the 32nd chapter and basically lays out the case that if you do not repent, you're going to find yourself in the same boat that the nations found themselves at Babel. So what does this got to do with the 4th and 5th chapter of Revelation? And this is what I saw here. In Revelation 1, we got the prologue, that first introductory paragraph. And then John greets the 7 churches. He greets them from the Alpha and the Omega. And then in the next part of the first chapter, follow along in your Bible, the next part of the first chapter is the vision of the Son of Man. And it's the same type of vision. We know that this heavenly being, which sounds mostly like the Father, but we've got Jesus involved in there, so it's not real clear exactly who it is, but this is the Most High that we're looking at. And he presents him once again in not a judgment situation, but a position of authority. We're not on the throne yet. And then what I'd never noticed, after he introduces God in the midst of the 7 menorahs, he goes on to dictate the letters to the churches. And after looking at Deuteronomy 32, Micah 6, Daniel 7, Ezekiel 1 through Isaiah 6, 1 Kings 22, all of a sudden it struck me. These letters to the churches weren't just letters to the churches on what was going well and what was going bad. God is presenting a case to not only these 7 churches, and you better believe the church at Thyatira, the church at Sardis, the church at Philadelphia are paying attention when he's talking to them, but the other churches that existed now, the gatherings of people around, are also getting word of this. This is a Rev. God is presenting a Rev to the condition of his newly formed church. He is presenting the same kind of case that we see in Deuteronomy 32. And then, after we read the church at Laodicea, after this, look and behold a door standing open in heaven. Come up here, and I will show you what is to take place. And behold, at once I was in spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, and one seated on the throne. God has just called the divine council into order, and the 7 letters are the case before the court. The 7 letters are the case before the court. Not only the case, in this case, it's not only the case against his people, because remember, some of the churches were in pretty nasty shape. Some of the churches were in pretty nasty shape, but some of them were in good shape. But always he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. After every one of them, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says, not to the church at Sardis, but says to the churches. And that's when it began to be clear that the letters to the churches are the Rev, the case that is before the divine council that is called together in chapter 4 and chapter 5. And guess who the prosecuting attorney is? All the living creatures were honoring God, but they couldn't find anybody that was worthy to open the scroll, the writ of the court, the decision of the court, that scroll sealed with 7 seals. That's the decision of the court. But nobody was worthy to open it, to find out the judgment that God had decreed, until the Lamb came up and was judged worthy. And you look, Jesus as the Lamb here. He's not sitting down on a throne. He's standing. So he is not standing in judgment. God is judging. Jesus is presenting the case. And we're almost at the end here. But look this week. You've got the references. 1 King 22, Isaiah 6, Ezekiel 1, the first 11 chapters of Ezekiel. Daniel 7, go back and read that, because Daniel 7 and Revelation 4 are almost carbon copies of each other. There are 14 points of agreement between those 2 chapters. So Daniel 7, Michael, the first 8 verses in Micah, not Michael, Micah, and Deuteronomy 32. Look at those examples of the heavenly court being called into action, and then look at the first 5 chapters of Revelation and see if you see the same thing I am, that this was the heavenly courts being called into session to pronounce a judgment on the world. This court is to pronounce a judgment on the world, and the judgment starts in chapter 6. So let's bear that in mind, unless somebody can come up with a good argument that this is not what I'm thinking it is. Look over that in that light. And Heiser is in his in those I think it's 4, in those 4 lectures. This is, I think, what he's getting at too, is we are looking at the divine council being called in session to pronounce judgment, a final judgment on the world. And we're going to start looking at that judgment and the consequences of the judgment in chapter 6. So, unless you can convince me, I'm going to go forward with that, is that once we hit chapter 6, this is the judgment of the court, the divine council is this. And it's a judgment on the world. And God's people are part of the world. So the consequences of the judgment are partially going to fall on us too. And that, I think, is what God was preparing the congregations in those letters. Because remember, he says, no matter what happens, be strong through the persecution, and in the end, you will be my people. I think it's a preparation for those who can persevere through the judgment on the world. It's a preparation to get ready, because God is about to judge the whole world. So look over that this week and see if that agrees with you or not. All right. So, any questions before we run out of time? And if you have a question we don't have time, we'll take them up next week. Any questions? All right. Well, then, everybody have a blessed Easter weekend. Go to a
Yes.
sunrise service. Those are always great.
Yeah.
Happy Resurrection Day, everybody.
Resurrection
Happy
Day.
Easter.
Look forward to it.
Night, everybody.
Good
Good night,
night.
everybody. Have a great week.
Night, everybody.
Good
Right.
night.